glad to introduce our next session of GovTech Management and Design. In this panel, we hope to explore how design methodologies play a vital role in helping government deliver valuable services and become more responsive to citizens. Right now in Brazil, interacting with the government is not usually a positive experience. So we want to bring practical use cases of GovTech happening outside of Brazil that were successful in using technology to enhance the relationship between citizens and the government. In order to help us to do so today, we have the honor to bring Bookman, Downe, and Fernanda Camargo as our moderator. Zach has a background as a trial litigation lawyer and as an advisor to the US military, and is the founder of OpenGov, the leading tool powering more effective and accountable government. Downe is the Director of Design and Service Standards for the UK government and the Government Digital Service. Leads a community of over 3,000 designers and researchers across government towards employing government to transform services to meet user needs, and was nominated one of the top 50 most creative leaders in the UK. Fernanda, our moderator, is one of our founding partners of Right Capital Wealth Management, an office specialized in social and environmental impact investments. Before that, she was also with several big wealth management companies and one of the founders of the Live Right Institute, an NGO dedicated to improving Olympic sports in Brazil. It looks like we have an amazing crew today, so please join me in welcoming Lu, Zach, and Fernanda to the stage.
I think it would be, great if you could talk a little bit of how you got involved with government, at least a little bit, and then we can go more into questions.
Sounds good. Do you want to go for the presentation?
Up to you.
Start? Okay, all right. I'm going to carry on the same thing, so we'll sat down. So let's do that. Hey, there we go. Hello, hi. So my name is Downe. I'm Director of Design and Service Standards for the UK government, and I work for an organisation called the Government Digital Service. And just a show of hands, just so I know how much details we give people, how many people have heard of the Government Digital Service in the UK? Okay, some people, that guy shaking his head, excellent. Okay, I'll presume you know nothing. So we are an organisation of about, I'm really sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so we're an organisation of about 900 people. We work in the centre of the UK government, and our job is to transform government services, or rather to help other people to transform government services. And really our job is to kind of do the hard work to making government services simple, so supporting the rest of the civil service to deliver better government services. And we... Sorry, this is not anyway. So part of our role has been to create one central website for the UK public sector. It is the main website which hosts all government services in the UK. It has been running for nearly 7 years, and it was a very complicated process, as you can imagine, to get all the different services that are existing in the UK government onto one single web platform. And we do other things aside from that website. We also develop a series of common products. So do really basic, essential things in order to build better, faster government services. So things like GovTech Pay, which takes and receives payments on behalf of government to take a product that comes into any service. GovTech Verify, which does identity verification. And GovTech Notify, which sends text messages, emails, and letters on behalf of government as well. So basically, big, boring infrastructure that helps the rest of government to design and deliver better public services. So we, in total, we've saved about £3.5 billion in the last couple of years. And we are 7 years old. done, right? So, 6 years in, 7 years in, surely you have transformed all of the services, surely you have kind of managed to create all of these products and create these web platforms in order to transform government services. And my answer to that is essentially the same probably that would be in the US and also in Brazil, that in the UK, the government is the oldest and largest service provider in the UK. So that means we have some services that date to over 200 years old. They have about 10,000 services stretched across 27 different departments and about 500,000 people providing those services. And the main problem with those services is that they weren't designed for the internet. So they were designed for a world that you walked into an office and you said to someone, okay, I'm trying to learn to drive, I'm trying to start a business, how do I go about doing that? And the person behind the desk said to you, this is how you do it, these are the forms that you use, and they help you to use that. And that is not the way that services work on the internet anymore. I'm presuming all of you know that that's the case. So this provides a really interesting challenge for government. Organizationally, how do we become an organization that is designed to work around the ways that actually the government works, way that the internet works? So how do we not only provide services that work on the internet, but how do we actually provide an organization that is able to design and deliver change really super quickly? And our initial approach to that 6 years ago was to centralize all of the stuff. So we built an organization within the center of the UK government that was essentially full of designers and engineers and people who were there to transform government services centrally. And that worked for a couple of years, and it had a huge impact. And we managed to transform 25 of the largest services in the UK government and put them on the internet. But it had a really limited effect, and it meant that ultimately all of the change that was happening centrally, and it didn't have the impact that we wanted to have across government. People weren't learning new skills, they weren't able to design and deliver those services themselves, and so that's where we set out on the next phase of transformation, which was really about increasing the capability of government to deliver services themselves. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. I think the introduction was really interesting. I think there's often a perception that kind of 7 years on, that we're in a different phase of kind of delivery of digital services to potentially other countries who haven't started that journey as long ago as we did. And yes, we are, but we still face exactly the same challenges and exactly the same issues of very siloed thinking, lots of bureaucracy, procurement that doesn't suit the way that we work. And so, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to discuss the different approaches that we've had in different countries. So, yeah, thank you.
Zach, just before you start, just to make a parallel, in Brazil, the GovTech movement starting its beginning. I mean, I think it's only maybe 2 years that we've been talking about that. So when we see, what they've done in the UK or what they're doing in the US, we want to do it in Brazil, and we know there's a lot of things that need to change, especially the law for procurement, and so it would be interesting to understand how you put together the team, how you managed to do that, and how do you measure the success of that? So that in Brazil we have 120 million people already using cell phones. The average cost of transactions, because it's on-site services, it's $14, and I think digital is 40 cents. The time of service providing is 5.5 hours average, and we understand that digital will cut that, I think, 90%. So the preliminary studies from the government, if we go this path to put all the services together, is to save something around 50 billion annually in Brazil. So it's something we really want to do it. But Zach, can you talk a little bit about yourself, how did you start it, and a bit of Bookman?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I just saw Rodrigo, told him how remarkable this conference is. It's really hard to put this together, and I'm super inspired and impressed by what the entire Brazil and Silicon Valley team has done. I'm Zach Bookman. I'm co-founder and CEO of an enterprise software company. It's a venture-backed enterprise software company called OpenGov.com. Has anyone heard of it? I wouldn't expect it, but maybe a couple. Whoa, awesome. I want to acknowledge one of our great advisors, the great former mayor of Washington, D.C., Mayor Fenty, will be speaking tomorrow. It's really nice to see some friendly faces. So we are a venture-backed software company that is building cloud-based software for budgeting, performance measurement, and transparency and open data for all of the state and local governments across the United States. So we run the budgeting process for Richmond, Virginia, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Lincoln, Nebraska, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and many, many other cities, towns, counties, state agencies. We work with about 2,000 governments now across the United States. We've raised nearly $90 million from venture capital firms like Andreessen Horowitz and many other top firms, including some folks that have been speaking here today, like Scott Cook and Joe Lonsdale. We started this company nearly 7 years ago. I was living in half a shipping container in Afghanistan. I was an advisor to United States Army General H.R. McMaster on the Anti-Corruption Task Force, which was set up at the International Security Assistance Forces headquarters in Afghanistan. And with our co-founders here in the Valley, we had seen some fundamental problems in how our governments were running, and perhaps you can relate in Brazil. We saw virtually every city and state running 30-year-old software from the likes of Oracle or SAP or other major software vendors who were basically selling the same software they've been selling to the private sector for a generation or two, with a bunch of consultants to screw it in. And the government executives and government officials, many of them were working super hard and basically banging their heads against the old technology. It was not connected to the internet, it was on-premise, it was legacy. They couldn't budget, they couldn't allocate their money according to strategic goals or priorities and actually measure what they get for what they spend. And then they couldn't communicate what's going on in the government with their elected officials, citizens, or the whole world. And we saw a whole interconnected array of problems, and we built a product strategy and a SaaS platform, a software as a service platform, to basically power more effective and accountable government. And we've been grinding away and now are making tremendous progress, doing much larger deals, working with major state agencies and states. The whole state of Ohio bought a license to OpenGov for every city and government in the entire state. We now have probably 1,000 governments across the state of Ohio that have dumped the whole contents of their accounting systems into OpenGov and made it available to the whole world, and many, many other exciting case studies. And we've attracted some of the top people in the Valley to this mission-driven company. Mark Andreessen's joined the board, John Chambers, the chairman of Cisco, former CEO and chairman of Cisco, joined the board, and some fantastic advisors, all committed to helping governments move into the 21st century. So we are a private sector but mission-driven company trying to drive both cultural and technological change. Cultural change so that they'll adopt the technology, overcoming procurement hurdles, decision-making hurdles, and adoption, basically how you train employees in these organizations. And it's gotten really exciting, and there's now, I'd say, a pretty robust government technology ecosystem, including many people who are now running up against the same problems I had to face 5 years ago because they think we're more successful than we are, and they're running headlong into what is a really challenging but often inspiring and definitely can be lucrative market opportunity.
Can you guys talk a little bit about, did you have any resistance to work with the government? How did it start? How did you get agencies to collaborate?
It's been super easy for us. How about you?
Very smart.
Yeah, I mean, I can give the experience of what it's like working inside government, and probably add another layer of being outside of that as well. So I think the major issue that we had back when we first started 7 years ago was that essentially when you come into a very old organization and try to do something new, you're not actually doing something new. You're doing something that someone has been trying to do for the last 20 years. It's incredibly insulting when you tell them that they haven't been doing a job for the last 20 So that approach didn't work, and we have had to essentially focus a lot of our effort on understanding why government works in the way that it does, because to a certain extent, actually, government is very risk averse for a very, very good reason, in that it looks after people's lives, and you do not want people to die because your technology doesn't work. So a lot of that risk aversion, a lot of that focus on KPIs, and all of that kind of stuff is actually very important. One of the things that really broke through that for us was actually pointing out the risk of not doing it. So what happens if we just don't make any technological changes whatsoever? And actually showing the fact that we are spending, and so in the UK we spend about 60% of our cost to government on services. About 80% of that cost is spent on government pays for. So essentially people phoning up government saying, where is my pay? How does this thing work? So the cost of that services. When you factor into the fact that about a third of the UK GDP is spent on public services, that's a lot of money that we're spending basically on bad public services, and that is a risk. So we had to just reframe the conversation really around what happens if you don't do something, which worked for us. But yeah, I'm curious to go into
Basically, every single thing has been excruciatingly difficult. I think it's really hard to start any business, and it's particularly hard to start an enterprise business where you sell software to an organization. And I'd say it's maybe 20% harder to sell software or technology to a government organization. I'll give a case study. Our company's headquartered in Redwood City. It's about 10 miles north of here. We used to be based literally 200 yards across the street, and the building got bulldozed, and it's now a beautiful part of Google's campus. It was kind of memory lane when I walked down there earlier. Redwood City asked me tonight. I was very excited to hang out and party tonight with the group, but they said, can you come over to our city council meeting where the board of directors meets and the public is welcome, and can you say hi and how excited you are that the city is going to adopt OpenGov's technology? The assistant CEO of the city asked me to do that. I said, okay, that will cap what is probably a year-long sales cycle. Now, it's great that they're coming aboard. They're our hometown. They've been to our office. The mayor's been to our office. I cannot tell you how many meetings we have had. And then it turned into a big fight, OpenGov versus Oracle. Oracle's located in Redwood Shores, right across the freeway. And Oracle's coming in saying, we can do everything. Why would you go with this startup? We got everything, and we'll only charge you $3 or $4 million. That was supposed to be funny. We'll charge them a lot less than that. And it turned into a big fight. The IT director wanted to go with Oracle. The assistant CEO wanted to go with OpenGov. Classic enterprise software fight. Best of breed versus suite. Demonstrations. Well, everything Oracle says is a lie, just so you know. And they're just showing pretty pictures. They don't actually have the software yet. On and on and on. Is anyone here from Oracle? I'm sorry. I'm sure you be friends. But it's just hard work. And you not only have to build the technology, you have to figure out how to distribute it. And distribution in the enterprise context means you have to put on a sport coat and you have to go speak to the government executives who are fighting every day to make change in their own wars, and they're often fighting their own people or their board. And so we deal with that every day, and we do it with a smile.
And what about talent? How do you attract talent? And in the case of GDS, I know you have many designers, and you have designers working in the agencies as well. And so how do you get people to come?
Yeah, so a really good question. And actually, I've been talking a lot to my colleagues in the US about differences in challenges in the UK and the US to recruitment into public services. And so I can talk about the context in the UK, which is very much that there is a strong tradition of working in the public sector. It's not a career that is looked down on, so that's a really good start. But the main thing that we've done is actually showing why it's a really attractive prospect to work for government. So whereas you can't talk about your work if you work for a startup or you work for a private agency, you can in government because the taxpayers have paid for your work. So you can talk about that stuff openly. That's a really attractive prospect to a lot of designers. Secondly, the fact that they get to work on challenges that are bigger than any challenge that they can possibly think about in the private sector. And in an environment that actually is set up to care about people. So a lot of the designers that work for us are incredibly socially motivated. They want to work in an environment, and they also want to show their work and be able to have a portfolio they can talk about openly. So I think those are the really kind of main factors. And also just providing an environment where they can network and talk to each other. So we have monthly meetups where around kind of 200 to 300 designers get together and share and talk about their work. I don't know any other design team in any organisation that does that and has the level of kind of critical engagement that we have about service design. So I think actually large organisations in general provide a really great opportunity for designers to really thrive, but particularly public sector ones.
So talent is the lifeblood of a technology company, and it's been basically the core focus of the company since the beginning, and we've tried to double down the last couple of years. At the beginning, we were able to recruit a lot of talent, including from Stanford, based on the mission-driven nature of the company. We want to build a big company that's good for our shareholders and employees, but we want to have a big impact on society. Our chairman, who was here earlier, Joe Weinstein, likes to talk about for-profit philanthropy. Starting a company and building a company in a space that is desperate for innovation, like government. And that attracted a lot of people. We're at a point in the company's life cycle in terms of how big we are, where we have to make money. We have to sell the software for real prices. We have to compensate the sales professionals so that not only they can feed their families, but that we can win them in a competitive hiring process over a Salesforce or an Oracle or a Workday or what have you. And it's really exciting to be continually raising the level of talent of the company, now attracting people who've run major organizations or have tremendous track records, both in the GovTech industry, but also just in the enterprise software industry more at large.
And what about data? I mean, we talk a lot about open data today, and in your case, do you have access to all government data? Any restriction on that? Any resistance? How does it work?
I think she probably has more access to government data even than I do. I don't know. We might have to beg and plead and borrow from the agencies, but we have to go sell the software. So I mean, we can scrape public data, but that doesn't really do anything. So I actually, if you're the CEO of a government, we actually have to create a value prop that is so compelling that you say, I need that for my organization or for our community, and I'm going to buy it from you, and then we get access to all the data. We give you the controls over it, and now hundreds and hundreds of governments across the country are publishing tons of data, not just their financial data and their budget data, which is exciting enough, but their police and crime data, their potholes paved and miles, or potholes filled and miles paved, and tons of different KPIs and metrics about their operation. And increasingly, that's becoming a focus of governments across the United States, a whole movement towards performance management. So I spent this much money, what did we get for it? And not just tracking activity like, potholes filled, but like user satisfaction and actual outcomes.
So it's interesting you mentioned user satisfaction. So government in the UK has two problems with data. We have the issue of data about users that needs to be transferred between different services. So if you're importing something into the UK, you have to deal with 5 different government departments. All of those different departments need to talk to each other about you, about your information. So that's a real challenge about data as standards, particularly open standards for data. The second one, which just kind of touches on your point, is around understanding when a service is actually doing well and when it's not. So yes, there's a movement towards more KPIs and more metrics, but are people actually measuring the right thing? And one of the things that we found actually, we used to have a platform that monitored the performance of government services. And it's been redeveloped and is currently in private beta. But the original platform had one of its major KPIs was user satisfaction. And we did some testing on this, and lo and behold, and this will not be surprising to anyone in the room, user satisfaction is a really bad way of measuring government services, because if you go to prison, you're not very happy about that. And if you get your pension, you're very happy about that. So when you ask people, did you like this service, you will not get a correct answer. And some people are just so grateful to have completed that service that they will go, yes, oh my God, thank you. this is the best service in the world. So we had to really rethink how we were thinking about government service performance and really start to think about not just measuring the digital service, but measure the offline service as well. Because if people are phoning you and if people are using the paper service, that means that even if you do have a digital service, it's not doing well enough. So we've been really rethinking how we're talking about metrics, because ultimately for us, what gets measured gets done. If you measure user satisfaction, people will obsess about that and try to improve it, even though they run the prison service.
How many designers do you have?
So in government in total, we have about 950. In each department, so there's about 25 of them. Some departments have one designer, some departments have 10.
Do they all roll up to you and your org, or are they in the agency?
So they're within the agencies. We run essentially that 950 group of people as a community. So I'm the head of design for the UK government. I set the standards for design. I work with that community to make sure that they have everything that they need to be able to design better services. So providing things like the GovUK design system, which standardizes all design patterns for government services, making sure that we have consistent pay and reward for all of those designers. And I essentially look after a leadership network of heads of design within each department. So they then manage those teams.
And one question, how do you manage to get the power over all the agencies, the websites? I mean, how did you get all of them to, centralize?
With great difficulty. So this was a real, so basically one of the first things that we did when we created GES was to create GovUK, which is a central website for all government services. And by doing that, we needed to create a consistent experience of government services. That meant moving them all into one kind of design language, one font, all of those sorts of things. And really, actually, what we did was to, rather than force people into it, because no one likes being forced into doing something, to actually explain what the benefits were and explain how much cheaper it was to essentially have a centralized website, to explain how easy it was to then kind of have your content centrally managed. Because it simply was, it was the only way that we could deal with the type of scale of content and services that we have in the UK, is to make sure that they are essentially in one place and managed in one place. For security as much as it is for user experience, if we need to kind of give certain messages to the public, we need to give them in a consistent way on one web platform, rather than 25,000 websites, or however many we had. We had a lot of websites.
Well, Zach, as I said before, in Brazil, we have 90% of our spending is predetermined by constitution. So we have discretionary only over 5 to 10% of the spending. And it would be interesting to see a software like yours working, in Brazil, to show, especially congressmen, the measure the policies. Are you able to do that, to measure the impact of the policies?
Yeah, we've had some really neat case studies, even from small towns. We have a significant pension crisis, I'd say, in the United States as well. I think Brazil is dealing with something perhaps a little bit ahead of the United States, but so many towns, their board directors don't even understand what's going on financially in the town, let alone the citizens. So if the town needs to pass an additional sales tax or raise other revenues, the software is repeatedly being used to actually show the trends. If we do not pass the sales tax, here's what's going to happen to our budget, or our operating expenses are going to outpace our budget. And it sounds funny and kind of elementary, but for people to see it on a screen in pictures and a graph and a chart, as opposed to thousands of rows of Excel data, or just hear testimony from a finance director, is really powerful. And that's one of the San Mateo County School Board, San Mateo City School Board had tried repeatedly to pass an increase in, I think, property tax, and they failed, and then we went in there and they did a whole pre-zoning council and so on, and it passed the next year, and they would have had a serious disaster if it didn't pass, and they were very grateful. Those type of hometown stories are happening a lot. They're really impactful for the communities. We're very decentralized in the United States. Local governments are like little kingdoms, and they're all over the place. You're in Mountain View right now, you go 5 miles that way, you're in Palo Alto, you go 5 miles more, you're in Redwood City, you go 2 miles to the left, you're in San Mateo. You know, it's like there's towns and counties, and they all feel like they run the world. They're a little piece of it. And so how they spend their money, what they spend it on, and how they educate their communities is really key. And software can be really useful for that.
All right. How are we with time? Sorry, because we have some questions. Penny? Okay. Okay. Just to pick one question here. What are the main challenges to implement a private sector mindset in the public sector? Are they different in development and developing countries than versus developed countries?
It's a good question. So I don't think we need a private sector mindset in the public sector. I think we need to enable people to have a better, clearer, kind of faster public sector mindset. So one of the really interesting examples of this is actually with accessibility. So with governments, any government service needs to serve 100% of users 100% of the time. That is completely different to any private sector service. No other service in the private sector kind of has to say, no, these users, even though they are the most edge case of the most edge case, are our users, and we have to serve those people. So it provides a really interesting challenge for government where we have to make all of our services accessible to an incredibly high degree, which means that, I would say this, but our services are probably more accessible than any private sector service for that reason. And so often we, in terms of design standards and design patterns, we're setting an example for other organizations to be able to use those patterns and use those standards. And I know that from the work that we've been doing has been used in the private sector a lot. So I think there's an interesting kind of challenge. I think people often equate the private sector with being super fast and super energetic and doing things in the right way. And actually, if you look at the type of things that the public sector are trying to do, actually they're doing a better job, but often either not allowed to talk about it or having to do it in a slower way. And so I think the real challenge is helping people to speed up and be more okay with risk in that kind of situation. So making sure that we can actually make services accessible. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think I agree with some of what you said. No one would, say to themselves, I have a business idea. Why don't we lend library books, protect people from criminals, and sell waste treatment services and generate electric power? That'll be our business plan. Doesn't that sound great? Nobody would do that. The public sector, particularly a general purpose city or county or state, is basically a collection of for-profit and non-profit businesses that we don't want in the private sector for one reason or another. And the goal is not efficiency. The goal is participation and deliberation. I mean, if you want efficiency, you appoint like a dictator or something, and they just drive it down, or a military organization or something. You don't like set up a council and go do every vote by committee and so governments are almost like by design inefficient, and in many respects we set those up, like we designed them like that so that everyone can have a say and it's accessible to people who need the services. So you do have to kind of play in the context of the environment. I would probably prefer to hear from folks in the audience or you about the efforts to adopt technology in a developing country or something like that. It's, my sense is there's probably opportunity to get things done that doesn't exist here, and then there are things in the United States that we can get done that, there's probably a lot to learn and share, but I would, the US and perhaps the UK, we have plenty of our own challenges. This is really hard work. I was just in Congress 1 week ago today, and then I went and visited a friend running a significant agency, and he had a Nortel phone on his desk. I don't know if anyone has Nortel phones. It was a good 20, 25 years old, and it's sitting on his desk, and it was kind of like a real throwback, frankly, to like my elementary school days, and that's how, I won't name the agency, but major U.S. agency is currently operating.
Well, I can tell a little bit well, at least
It's
these.
a Nortel phone. That's funny, right?
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
It's not from.
It makes a flip phone more modern. This is really old school.
Well, we can say that in Brazil it's like that. You know, it's still slow, but as people are having experience using technology, they want the same from the government. So, and also now the people in the government, they want to do it. The limitations are especially to attract talent because we have to work with public servants, you know.
Something going on in the U.S. is that the baby boomers are retiring, and there's a stat I heard that like 50% of the government executives in the United States will be leaving their posts in the next 5 years. And the institutional brain drain is extraordinary. And young people don't want to go work in an administrative job in a government.
Same.
And the talent issue is a huge issue. It's I think they're calling it the silver tsunami here in the U.S. But that is, at a lot of the government conferences, that's a major item that's being talked about.
Yeah,
And technology is part of it. That's how you attract great people. You give them great tools, and you say, here's the type of stuff you get to work with and work on. And I think it's all interconnected.
Yeah, the people in the government, when they see things that you're doing, you know, they get very excited, but then they want to hire it, and they can't. And you said you have how many designers?
950.
Yes. So you have to imagine that for us, we have to find those in the government. So at the moment, you know, many things need to change, but we have a small example when Zema talked about earlier in Minas Gerais. They started some small tests, and if it works, I think it inspires other states and the government to follow the same path. So we need to start. Question from Luciana Barramos. What criteria should government use to evaluate whether to pilot and then purchase new GovTech products?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah. So I guess we're talking about procurement of products, right? So the types of criteria, I can talk about the types of criteria that we use. And those are based on, is this product accessible? So number one, is the thing actually going to be accessible by all the users that need to use it? Is that thing secure? So does it look after people's data? Those are really the kind of two major things. We also have two, you can look them up, it's not interesting to read, two very clear standards that apply to buying technology as technology, and then buying supply of things to design a service. It's a technology code of practice and a service standard. Both of those essentially state that that product or service must meet user needs. So that's the primary thing, is like, does this thing actually do what it is supposed to do? So if you can't answer that question, and you can't answer whether or not it's secure, or if it's accessible, then it's not something you should buy. And then there are a number of other nuanced questions, but really those are the main things for us.
I have maybe a slightly different view. I think the criteria by which a government should pilot technology should be minimal. I think government organizations need to really open up to the ideas of beta programs or testing out new technology, or frankly just supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's very different than actually betting a mission-critical system on an immature startup. I hate to say it because I've been there, but the tech actually has to work. And so I do think it has to work, and that has to be the criteria for actually buying it and deploying it in a mission-critical application or domain. But to test it, I look back on our history and some of the great CIOs or city managers or governors who were real leaders, and they said, we need to take this organization forward, and they put their necks on the line to go test new technology and to support the entrepreneur. And that's huge for a company to get off the ground and actually start the flywheel of building and selling. And I think of Palo Alto, our first customer. I think of the state treasurer of Ohio, who we were a little nothing startup, and he signed a five-year, $4 million deal, and it went exceedingly well for him.
He did 400 press releases across the state of Ohio and was ahead in the polls to be the next senator from the state of Ohio when he had to drop out for family health reasons. But I guess I'd say those are two very different things. Pilot, be aggressive, and then unfortunately you gotta be buttoned up to win big contracts.
Because otherwise you cannot innovate without making mistakes, right? You have to test. Yeah, that's
Innovation and mistakes it's the same thing. That's what it means.
Yeah, and also add to this kind of list is, it's incredibly important that is open source. So government's really, really bad at buying things that it can't adapt itself, and it doesn't own that code, and doesn't own that software. Maybe that's controversial to say in this room, but government needs to own its delivery. And if it doesn't own the code that it buys, it can't change that. So that is, again, a really critical thing we look for when we're buying software in the UK.
We disagree on this. We agree on so much, but we disagree on this. You cannot get innovation just through open source. It just doesn't work. And you look at any back office system, I would argue, and there's a company behind it because it's so expensive to innovate and to invest in R&D. So my experience, let's put it this way, my advice to entrepreneurs, I have nothing wrong with open source. In fact, we're the biggest contributor to open source, open data, I think, in the world. When we standardize a portion of our platform on actually a British CCAN standard, and we support it heavily, but there's so much more technology that you just can't deliver for free. And we actually grew out a nonprofit where we were trying to study some of these problems in the back office of governments. And we said the only way that we could invest in R&D is if we can sell the product. And so it's I have a view on that, obviously.
We're going to need to agree to disagree on that.
We have another 5 minutes. One more question. Zach, the process of public procurement in Brazil is highly susceptible to corruption. Did you deal with any case ever in America?
Yeah, what we basically have in the United States is, I would almost term a legalized corruption, where basically there's really no RFPs. A request for proposal is a public bid inviting vendors to submit responses. And in virtually every case of an RFP, it's written by a particular vendor working with an executive in the government already. So they're in there selling and they say, oh yeah, you're right, I do need an accounting system. What should it do? And they're like, well, here's a list of all the features and functions, which just so happen to be the exact features and functions that this particular vendor has in mind. And so that's one thing that's going on. And now most software and most technology is not actually procured through RFPs anymore. It's procured through procurement vehicles. These are pre-competed contracts, typically held by what are called resellers. And there's many companies that will resell your technology because they have your SKUs listed on a state procurement vehicle. So that if you're the executive in the government, you can just buy it like you're shopping at Walmart. Oh, I'll take SKU 5049, which is OpenGov's budgeting product. And so it's really hard for startups to get on these procurement vehicles because you have to have expensive business development professionals going out there and getting on every state contract, regional contract, and other things. Once you're on it, you have a huge competitive advantage. And so it's kind of this middleman racket. I don't know the way to crack that one. Many people talk about it, it's like, it's a cultural change. Basically, we tried so hard to fight corruption that we set up these procedures that are so complicated to follow that only the resellers can follow them and those who can play with the resellers will.
So in the UK, we have essentially that kind of procurement vehicle that you're talking about, but it's used, so it's called Digital Marketplace, and we created it to essentially make it incredibly easy for small companies and startups to be able to get onto those procurement frameworks, and once they're on that procurement framework, they're then able to be used by any government agency, local or federal in the UK. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it goes some way to kind of tackle the corruption, but also, not creating this incredibly onerous process that means that you're actually creating corruption in another way by only giving those contracts to really large suppliers.
So So just to finish, what would be your advice to us residents and to the students here in Stanford if they want to work for, GovTech?
I think my first piece of advice would be go and work in government. Sorry. Because I think a lot of the changes that need to be made in government are things that actually can't be lobbied on the outside. I suppose, really government should be owning its kind of means of change, its means of kind of production. So working in government is an incredibly exciting thing to do. If you create an environment where those people can thrive and they can be innovative and they can create things that move the kind of movement on. But my first piece of advice is to sort of work out where those places are. Where are those places where innovation can happen? Where are the kind of cracks in the system where you can kind of force that open a little bit and maybe create space for really great teams to do really great work, and go and find those places and go and work there, because you will be able to deliver 100 times what you will be able to deliver by lobbying outside of government. Would be
My advice would be to buy more technology. You won't have a startup ecosystem if there's no governments buying or testing any technology. And so I think it's a cultural or volitional issue to go make some mistakes. If you're governing or legislating, it takes two to tango. It takes entrepreneurs and it takes buyers in the market.
Well, we hope we can work on that. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.